Victoria?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, much better.
It seems to be a
Hi, Amy. Hey, Vicki.
Okay. Okay, let's do a test. So Victoria, you can hear us, right?
Yeah, the volume's a little low. Can we up the volume?
Okay, why don't you up that one?
How about now? Can you hear better?
That's better.
Okay.
Yep.
Why don't we leave it at that? That's great.
Okay. Is everyone? So let's get started. You want to start? Is it start? Okay, terrific. So my name is Peter Young. I'm the Yale class of '74, and I'm very, very pleased to welcome you to the 7th in a series of career panels on careers after Yale. This series focuses on providing students and alumni with candid and hopefully helpful views of different professions via panels of successful practitioners in each field. Today's profession is drama and film, and we actually had 145 students and alumni register for this across the 3 venues at Yale, here in New York, and also via streaming video. Very briefly though, why is there a need for an event like this? And to be honest, as smart and as resourceful as Yale students and graduates are, which of course we all know is true, it is hard to get candid and credible information about different professions. It is our hope that this series of webinars will provide Yale students and graduates with candid, credible views so that they can make intelligent choices about their careers. The reality is so many of these professions have a lot of hype around them. Certainly drama and film is a good example because we see it on TV
Great.
or the movie theaters. So it's really, the attempt here is to make sure that the real positives and the real negatives come through so that people can make the right decisions about their careers. Now, since the spring of 2011, we've covered consulting, the medical profession, the legal profession twice, and investment banking twice. And the last career panel that we'll have this academic year after this one will be on April 17th on entrepreneurism. Attendance thus far has been really exceptional, and the feedback that we've received from students and alumni has been very positive. What's a little bit unique about this setup is the 3 venues. Essentially what we have is we have live here in New York, we have live at Yale, and then we have audio and streaming video for those who can't make it to either location. And the whole idea is to make these events accessible to the greatest number of students and alumni, regardless of the location. It won't surprise you that students like to stay at Yale. Panelists, depending upon who they are, they either like being up at Yale or like being in New York, and alumni are spread all over, sometimes in New York, sometimes in Pennsylvania, whatever. If you could believe it, the last one we had a Yale student who was at Yale in China in Beijing dial in at 4:30 in the morning, so into the streaming video. So this is a way to maximize our ability to get the best panelists, but at the same time make it easy for both alumni and students to participate wherever they are. Before I introduce the speakers, I'd like to just thank a few people and organizations, because this is very much a collaborative effort. First, at Yale, we'd like to thank Elaine Mazzarella, Katie Volz, who's here, Lance McCormick, who is, I think, somewhere up at the Yale location, and the rest of the Yale Undergraduate Career Services staff. Steve Bloom and Elizabeth Rocher of AYA, Trish Takimoto, who is here in the audience here, from the Association of Asian American Yale Alumni, Mai Lu of the Yale Alumni Association of New York, STAY, and the Junior Class Council. All of those organizations help in both the planning but also the marketing of these events. I also want in particular to thank the Dean of the Yale School of Drama and a number of the professors who were very, very helpful in helping to get our fine panelists today. Lastly, I'd like to give special thanks to Freshfields, who has graciously provided the use of this room and the video conference equipment to connect to Yale. Freshfields, as many of you know, is a global law firm with 2,000 lawyers worldwide, 28 offices in 18 countries across Asia, Europe, the Middle East, and North America. And according to Tim Harkness, who is the partner here at Freshfields, who arranged for the use of this meeting room, he believes that one of the hallmarks of Freshfields is the vibrant and diverse culture, which is why they are very happy to welcome the Yale students and alumni to today's event, and he wishes everyone a terrific experience. For today's event, I'm going to first introduce the panelists, and then I'm going to guide the panelists through the 5 topics that were outlined in the invitation that you received. And then we're going to make sure that we leave at least 10 minutes at the end for questions and answers. And those of you who are physically either up at Yale or here in New York, you can ask questions just by raising your hand, and we'll be able to recognize you and you can come up to the mic. For those who are participating via conference call or streaming video, since you're muted for obvious reasons on the audio, please send your questions to yalecareerpanels@gmail.com. I have an iPad right here where I'll be able to read your questions. And to show you how interested people are, I actually got a question before we started from someone, actually a rather good one, so I plan on using it. We do expect to end at 5:30, but the panelists, both at Yale and here in New York, have graciously agreed to stay on to answer questions and meet with the attendees. So our panelists today, to my left we have Amy Herzog, who is a highly accomplished playwright. She has a play that's currently running here in New York that you can see that got very good reviews, which you should all see. To her left we have Ira Sachs, who's a very successful film director, and I think from your bio you see he's done quite well and won many awards. And we have Victoria Nolan, who is the managing director of the Yale Repertory Theater now for 19 years, right, Victoria? And
Yep.
Also a deputy dean of the Yale School of Drama. Since the biographies of each of these panelists are in the materials you received, I won't repeat them. However, what I'm particularly pleased about is to have such a diverse group of panelists from different disciplines. Now, we all realize, though, there are many different disciplines in drama and film. If we had to have someone from every discipline, we'd have a very large panel. But I do think that we have 3 excellent panelists who represent 3 important parts of drama and film, i.e. playwriting, film direction, and the management of theater, which are 3 very important parts. And although all of the panelists, I recognize and know that they love their profession, they've all promised to be candid and to focus on the challenges as well as the joys of being in drama and film. So let me start by first, before going through the questions, I'd like each of the panelists really to briefly talk about how they got into the profession and what they do. So maybe we can start with Amy, and then we'll move through to Victoria.
Sure. I am a playwright, and I began as an actor, actually. I was sort of a theater kid, and Ira and I were talking before this began about sort of, being a young person interested in the arts. And I thought that I wanted to be an actor, and acted throughout elementary school and high school and at Yale quite a bit. When I graduated from Yale, I went on an audition to be in a touring company of a children's theater show, an adaptation of Beverly Fimby. And I got this role, and I went on tour for about 6 months as an actor. Lived out of a van, lived in a lot of sort of Motel 6s, and had a really difficult time having totally ceded creative control over my life. And gradually came to the realization over the 6 months that acting wasn't really for me. So from there I went on to work in theater management for 2 or 3 years. I taught, I was a company manager, worked in different aspects of the theater before I gradually figured out that I really wanted to be a playwright. And in 2001, which was a year after I graduated from Yale, I wrote my first short play. Spent the next 3 years in New York trying to figure out playwriting, enrolled in the Yale School of Drama in 2004, graduated in 2007, and started really having a career in 2010. So for me, it was sort of a 9-year incubation period before I started making a living and really working in the theater.
All right.
I graduated from Yale in the class of 1987, and throughout Yale, my years there, I was a theater director primarily, so I worked also in the theater, and often worked with the drama school quite a bit with people there. In my last year at Yale, I spent 3 months as a semester in Paris, and I actually found that I didn't speak French and I wasn't enrolled in school, and I found myself in the movie theaters 3 times a day. I saw about 197 films in a 3-month period, and it was just natural. It was a place that I felt comfortable and excited, and I saw all these kinds of films that I had never seen. So I came back, and I knew that I wanted to make a shift. For me, theater was a place that the directing in theater was much more of a craft, and there was something much more personal about film, which also allowed me to become a writer, and I'm a screenwriter, and I work on my material. I applied to film school. I applied to NYU, UCLA, and USC in my senior year at Yale, and I didn't get into any of those schools, and I was shocked. And I moved to New York.
We've lost the audio here.
You lost it?
We can't hear your audio.
You think I can? How about now? Better? Can you hear
Yeah,
me?
it's all broken up. Maybe it'll go away.
Hello, hello. Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me? No.
We're gonna get a technician, so why don't you continue for the moment?
Okay. So, in a way, for me, it was actually a gift not to get into film school, because what I did instead was I started making movies. So, very early on, I started making short films, and I sort of just continued what I did at Yale, which was make things. And I did that for my first semester in college. I just felt, I was arrogant enough, or I was had enough self-confidence that I started making short films. I made my first feature in 1996 in my hometown of Memphis, where I'd grown up. And that film was, as an independent film, successful to the extent that it opened in festivals and was at Sundance and was theatrically released. I then had a similar 9-year gap, which was getting from my first feature to my second feature. The first feature was $225,000, which I was able to pull together from a variety of family and friends. The second one was budgeted at $1.75 million, and it took me 9 years to raise that money, and a lot of depressive time in between that and lots of other things. So, the question of economics is always very central to what it is to be an artist, I would say, for any of us. Since that point, I have made a couple of more feature films. Both one was a Hollywood film with name actors out there, and that was one kind of experience. In the last few years, I've returned to sort of more independent work, and not, questions of why are, again, always about economics, but it's actually been a good return to me to something that was very vital and outside the system. I've sort of come back to a countercultural place, and I think that's actually been strategically very useful for me as a filmmaker and as a professional. I wouldn't say it was only strategic the reasons I did it, but I would say that it has had that effect. I'm now trying to finance my 5th feature. I'm also now a professor at NYU in the graduate program of film, which did not previously then, and I teach students, and I'm very involved in several different types of community activism. I run a film series called Queer Art Film. I run a arts mentorship program called Queer Art Mentorship, which is in 5 different disciplines. So, and I say that also because I found, just like the cover of New York Times Magazine last week, which was about the strategy of being involved in the world as one way of making yourself more productive. That has been a big part of my 40s, is entering the world in all different ways, and the unexpected returns, both personally and professionally, which have come from that. So we can talk about that a bit more.
Victoria, can you hear us now?
They asked if we could just
Yes, you're back. So it's interesting that you both talked about, Ira, you talked about arrogance and self-confidence, and having the arrogance and the self-confidence to go out and make your life work in film. And I think, Amy, you said when you were acting, you didn't want to cede control of your life, that you wanted to take control back. And those are all elements, I think, of making a life in the arts, is that you have to make it happen. And for me, I never wanted to be an actor. I thought that was terrifying. But I always wanted to be in charge. So from my very early stage, I know this is going to sound nerdy as hell, but from my earliest age, I would take my parents' junk mail out of the wastebasket, and I would take it into the living room and put it on the rug on the floor and pretend that that rug was my desk. And I would open all the mail and fill out all the forms and put stickers on it and file it and organize it. And I don't, you know, I never mailed anything, but I played at being in charge. And then I hired my little brother to be my secretary. So then he had to open up, and it just went on for years. So and happily, because I grew up in a family that we had lots of exposure to artists, although it was Maine. It was Portland, Maine in the 60s, and there were no theater companies there, so I didn't actually ever see any theater, but we met lots of visual artists in my life, and so I liked being around artists, and I managed to shape my life in a way that allowed me to play office, and my job is to raise enough money so that I can pay as many artists as I possibly can to do the work that they do, and that's what gives me pleasure. And so I think when Ira said it boils down to a question of economics, I feel like I've spent my life and the people I've been teaching, who I hope will spend their lives doing it, think of ourselves as the little engines who could in the raising and the earning of money so that we can turn around and put it in someone like Amy Herzog's pocket so she will write. How's that for saintly, Amy? But I do think, I think you have to, whatever direction you take if it's in the arts, and everybody in this room that we're in New Haven wants to be in the arts, most of the students here are artists, has to be completely and totally committed to making that happen and trying to get it to a place where it is done at the highest professional level.
Let's start now with the questions, and the one I'd like to start with is really this question of myths versus realities. And I think every profession has myths and realities. I do think that in the case of drama and film, I think it's particularly true just because it's a very glamorous, quote-unquote, field. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to really give their perspective on what they think the myths and realities are relative to someone who's thinking about it as a career or started. And maybe we can start in reverse order and start with you, Victoria, in New Haven. What do you see as a myth and realities from the point of view of someone being in it versus, the industry itself?
Yeah. Well, that's a little hard. I think that for what comes to mind, which may not be quite answering your question, Peter, is that most people's way into thinking about theater is through the notion of becoming an actor. That's the way you learn, when you're a kid, you go to see a movie and you see an actor in a movie and you think that, or you see an actor on a stage and you think that is what theater is. And I can do that. So there's a little bit of myth and reality in that, which is, first of all, making theater is an enormous undertaking and requires an unbelievable number of people with such a vast variety of skills. I'm looking at two actors right now. Two fabulous actors on stage are going to be supported by maybe 100 different people who got them there. I just came from a production manager, essentially, from Cirque du Soleil, who was teaching a class, and we asked her how many people it took to do one performance of Iris, which is what she was a production manager of, recently closed in Los Angeles. There are 80 people every single night backstage making Iris happen. So making theater isn't easy. It's a myth that that if you want to work in theater, you have to be an actor. We need fabulous actors, but we need all the 60 to 80 other people who are going to make it possible for that actor to do that work on stage. Work that, by the way, has been generated by a writer and by a director and by a variety of extraordinary collaborators.
Ira, can we, your
Yeah,
myths and
I mean,
realities?
it's interesting because I think a lot of them, you know, the idea of that question in a way sets up that the reality is worse than the myth, and I would say it also reverse that there's a lot of things about the reality of working in the art field, which is actually really wonderful. And I think one of the things is that one of the positive realities is that the people you meet tend to be very stimulating and creative people, and that you surround yourself with people who strive to make things that they care about, and that's actually very valuable in a way that's not necessarily economic, but it is in terms of one's life. And I think just to say that all the negatives are, there's a lot of positives in these fields. For me, one of the things that was a myth that I needed to excise was the idea that anyone else would come in and become my parent as a professional artist, and that there would be, and I think this is different in different fields, and I would think on some level in theater there might be more of that kind of support. In film, the concept that a producer was going to come take care of the day, which is what people always think. They're like, well, who's your producer? I'm a writer and a director. I now name myself a producer. But they're always like, who's your producer? Is if that person's going to come raise the money and put it all together and write the script. And you know, what I have found is as more actively involved as I am, and I take a role as the parent, truthfully, the more I get done as an individual, and I don't secede. It could be I don't secede control, but I'm just not passive about what I want to get accomplished. One thing that I would say is that there's an idea that when you arrive at some amount of success, that the success sort of maintains itself, and I can tell you that doesn't work for a day. You know, success is just another. You know, it does in the sense that on a certain deep level, you have a growing sense of your own. You have more assurance that you're not making a total mess of your life by choosing to do this, and that's actually very deep and meaningful. On the other hand, success does not generally lead to an open door. It doesn't mean that you don't have to fight to get that door open. So I think the continual process of choosing to make things instead of not making things, to fight instead of not to fight, is something that I really have to embrace on a daily level. And then the last thing I would say is that there's this sort of negative idea that success is connected to the idea of who you know. And I would say the only reason I know anyone in this city or in this field is because I've made relationships with those people that are actually valuable and meaningful. And that there's not this other world in which people are just sort of knowing each other. It's actually about committing to other people as individuals and artists from an early point, which I did. I mean, I'm meeting next week 3 or 4 friends who we meet every year probably, because we're all still doing this. And we met when we were 25, 26, and the fact that we committed to each other as artists and supported each other was the thing that has been probably the most beneficial to me as an artist, is developing what I call dependent relationships, and dependency being a positive term.
Amy?
I think there's a prevalent myth in all of the arts, and I definitely don't think it bears out in reality in theater that there's such a thing as being discovered, that there's sort of a moment where you go from being the person you were to the successful artist. Where in my experience anyway, it's a really long process, it's a very long game. There can, in any artist's life, be the moment where suddenly people start paying attention, but that's usually the result of infrastructure you've been building for years and years and years and years. So, you know, I have a play called After the Revolution, which was the first play of mine produced off-Broadway and the first play to get me some attention. and it's often referred to as my first play, which is hilarious to me because it's like my 7th play. But nobody is interested in the first 6 as far as they're concerned. And you know, whenever I get interviewed, the reporters say, "Isn't it amazing? You just started writing, and in the space of 3 years, all this has happened." Well, no, it was 9 years before you started acknowledging my existence on this earth. So I think that it's important to remember that everything that you're doing is part of, you know, what you will eventually be recognized for, and that there is no, it's not like the time before that moment is negative and the time after that moment is positive. It's really important to remember that the work is the point that whole time. Specifically thinking about the theater, I think maybe one myth that I believed growing up was that theater was really cool and really relevant, and that the audiences would be filled with my peers who shared my values and cared a lot about my work. And to some extent that is true. But we do have a sort of crisis in the theater where the audiences tend to be older, and where young people who are really interested in all different art forms may exclude theater from their areas of interest. You might have people who are really engaged in the music scene and the visual art scene and the film scene, and aren't really on top of theater. And I think that's something that we're really struggling with as a profession, and I think actually this is a moment where it may be changing, and I think there are a few writers and a few directors who are really bringing some attention to our industry. But I think if you're entering our industry or planning to make a career in it, you have to consider that a huge part of your project as an artist, as opposed to just sort of assuming that you will have like-minded people right there at the ready. And the last big myth that may not be a myth to any of you who are really serious about theater, but is certainly a widespread myth in the culture at large, is that Broadway is the goal in theater. I feel at least that almost all of the most exciting work happens off Broadway. Of course there are exceptions, there's really exciting work on Broadway as well. But most of the artists I know coming up in my generation or the generations below are really aiming at off-Broadway in terms of you know, where they want their work to be seen and where they think their work would be seen in the best light. That means that you can't make a lot of money. So just to be really specific about it, if you are a playwright and you write a play that goes up at a respected off-Broadway venue like Playwrights Horizons, you'll make about $7,000 or $8,000. And you might have spent 2 years writing that play. If you're an actor, Roberta who works in theater management, or Vicky can maybe correct me, but I think you're making something like $700 a week. Is that right? Though you may be on the cover of, you know, the New York Times style section, you're still making $700 a week. So there is this interesting discrepancy, I think, between where your artistic aims might be and what lifestyle that might actually afford you.
That actually is an excellent segue to really my next question for the panelists. Drama and film as a profession is like a number of professions, such as music and so forth, where only a very small number of people make a lot of money, and a lot of people make no money, or there's no room for actually, you know, actually practicing your profession. Right? There are other professions where that's not true. If you're an electrician, I guarantee you'll do quite well, right? Because of the way it works. So the question is this: you know, obviously all three of you have had a career and stayed in a career in drama and film, but in this generic question, just to this audience, which people who are in it or not in drama and film, what's the right way of looking at that issue from a personal point of view, and what perspective do you have to have? By the way, the analogy was we had a panel on being a doctor, and one of the panelists was a woman 5 years out, a doctor, and she said, "Let me tell you, to be a female in the medical profession, it has some constraints. I love being a doctor, but let me tell you the constraints. Not that you shouldn't be a doctor if you're a woman, but you really all go in with your eyes open." So with that same sentiment, going in with your eyes open, from the point of view of, you know, income and so forth, what is the right way to look at it if you're thinking about drama and film? And this is directed to any of the three of you, so it's up to you to decide who to respond.
Well, you know, we've been talking a lot in the theater management about, particularly because we hear a lot of young people who are interested in coming into the profession, thinking about making their own work, and doing it through a series of building on relationships, and doing it through a series of people contributing their time. So we've been talking a lot about the issue of this is a loaded word, amateur versus professionalism, amateurism versus professionalism. And I don't want to suggest that young people who want to move to New York City and produce theater and do it in their bedroom because they only have a studio apartment with 4 of their friends and put it up in a garage and nobody gets paid. There's nothing wrong with that. I applaud that. I think that's great. But I believe that my commitment and the commitment of the people that I think will succeed are the ones who want to build an institution to support that work. That work has to come out of the 1-bedroom apartment or the studio apartment. It has to find a home. And the large institutions, there are many, many large theaters in this country who are not doing particularly interesting work, who have become prey to their balance sheets and having to earn a tremendous amount of revenue at their box office and therefore can't take risks, who have the equivalent of 21-bedroom apartments in their buildings that could be given over to some of these artists who are trying to make work. Let those institutions figure out a way to collaborate with these this undercapitalized community of people trying to create and find a way to help them make a living. I said earlier, my great pride and joy is to put money in the pocket of artists. That's what I proselytize everywhere. Yale Repertory Theater is a little teeny theater in a great, big, fancy, wonderful university. We pay our artists $1,200 a week. Nobody around the country, almost no theaters around the country are paying that much. We don't have to pay that much. We have to figure out a way to allow the artists in our country to make a living. And the only way I can think to do it is don't go out there and give yourself away. Negotiate, barter, have the self-confidence to think that you're worth something, and try to make some money. It's not going to be a lot, but it will grow over time if you try to demand for that.
Well, I just want to respond because I, of course, 100% agree with you. But you're coming at it from an institution and from a macro perspective of what change you want to see. I would, speaking from the kind of micro of an individual, I would say that independent film as a genre would not exist if people thought they had to be paid. And it's a sad truth. It's an unsustainable economy. And there's a lot of independent films made, but the number of independent filmmakers who then have sustainable careers within that corner of the industry is, less than 20 in the country, including myself, who is supported, like many independent filmmakers, partially by my family. So there's often a luxury that comes with certain types of art forms, and they come out of a luxury possibility, which doesn't mean that I get to make my films because of that, but I am not fully self-sustaining as an individual, and I say that in an environment like this because I think it's important to recognize how difficult it is. And what I see is a lot of people in my industry who started off as independent filmmakers then become television directors, because there's a sustainable industry in television. And if you want to raise your kids and your family and pay your light and get people, like have a kind of fair bourgeois life, then independent film is not for you. I hate to say it, but I don't know. I know so few people who've been able to maintain it over the years, and so a lot of what you're trying to do is strategically figure out what is possible within your own life and also within the industry, and that's a daily kind of maneuvering of trying to assess what is the economic environment and what are the possibilities both for yourself and for your work. And it's something you have to keep abreast and you have to keep aware and you have to keep very realistically in mind as you try to become a filmmaker, for example.
Amy, yeah, please.
Yeah, I would just add, and I know that I'm representing theater and I'm a playwright, and there are many of you who are actors and directors, and so I hope I'll remember to keep speaking about those those other crafts, and that you'll ask me questions about it if I'm being really playwright-centric. But for me, I went into this industry knowing that I would not support myself as a playwright. Tony Kushner does not work only as a playwright. All of the most successful playwrights you can think of have other ways of sustaining themselves economically. So I think basically there are two choices. You can teach or you can work in film and television. And both of those offer things like health insurance that playwriting does not. And as a mother, I have realized in the past year just exactly how important health insurance is. I wish I could say, if you are a playwright, there's a certain path you can take that will lead to a kind of secure life, but I just don't think that exists even for the very top strata in terms of success. Of playwrights, I think that the only exception would be if you write the book or lyrics for a musical that runs on Broadway for years, then you are a rich person in a whole new category of rich people. But really, and the cliche is you can't make a living, but you can make a killing. So it is possible to reach that, but short of that, there is no way. So you have to go into the profession with the understanding that you're doing it for love, and that you will have to have some other aspect of your life that will fill in the gap financially.
Yeah, I think that's, you asked for a realistic appraisal, and I think we're sort of being very honest to the fact that it's often not these things that you can do alone. And I see the exact same thing with filmmakers, and many filmmakers who want to do more experimental or more risky work, they teach within the university system. So they get full-time jobs as professors in art schools, and that's a very common way that people support themselves.
So, really the message is, in general, right, that if you want to be in drama and film, you should do it because you love being in it, and not because your objective was to get rich, right?
Well, I would say some people have more commercial taste than I do.
Yeah.
So in film, I wouldn't say this is a broad enough statement that no one can make, because there's certainly people who have more commercial taste who can find places within the industry where they make their money.
But you, Ira, surely, if you had some kind of real need, I'm sure you could get a screenwriting job, you could get a script doctoring job, right? Like with your reputation, if you wanted to, you could take advantage of the Hollywood machine too.
Well, I will say this is something I think it's very useful to talk about. I don't know if you would agree, but I think it's very hard to be a dilettante as a professional. And jobs, when I first started making independent films, a lot of my friends were doing serials. They were doing HBO, and they were doing This and That Hour, and that was a way. And I thought, I'll dabble in that. And I tried to dabble for a year, and I didn't get hired. It's generally what I found is those become career turns. And my screenwriter friends have done what you've done. They've worked 9 years to been to 100 meetings, which they had to get in order to become working, successful screenwriters. It's not as easy as it seems to dabble if you've had one big success, but it's sort of like if you've had one big commercial success.
But I will add, though, that the young producers that I know, some of whom graduated from the drama school recently, who are in New York and calling themselves independent producers, and are in fact independent producers, they are doing that, but they also have institutional underpinnings. They have what I would call day jobs, working for institutions, working for the public, working for Ann Bogart, for City Company, working for a variety of people. They have managed to, through their relationship building, to negotiate with their institutional home time, in their case, time to be able to go off and do independent producing. And I think you can be successful as an independent producer, keeping a day job until you can get your independent producing and your relationship building and your people who will ultimately write checks for you and be board members for you if that's what you need. You can do a day job. You're still not going to make much money. You're probably going to have 5 roommates and sharing very few number of rooms, but you can make it happen. And there are lots of people who are making it happen. And I know I come to this with an institutional bias, but I think the institutions need to pay. They have the space, they need to pay.
Well, I have a question. You mentioned Ann Bogart in that list as an institution. And I'm curious because in a way then that implies that she as an individual has created a career in which she became an institution, and I think that's just interesting to me. I'm curious about that.
Yeah. Actually, Anne would probably yell at me if she heard me say that. But, I'm thinking of City Company and their home at Columbia, right? They have an institutional underpinning there, and they have a staff.
Well, what you're sort of saying
But
what you're sort of saying is that as an individual who's an artist, you have to find some sort of support, whether it be from other individuals or an institution, in order to house your work, which you have. I would say you have theaters that are interested in you, that in a way give you roots to.
Yes. So it's a very different model from Anne Bogart and City Company. I don't have one institution that is my home, and but yes, what we have, the way it's structured economically in the theater, we have commissions. So I have a commission from the Yale Repertory Theater. I know I'm late with it, Vicki. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So we get sort of an advance, and then we write a play, and that's one way of making part of your living for the year. But for me, I write a play, and then if it's not a commission, which several of my plays have not been, you write the play and then it gets sent out to different theaters and somebody opts to produce it, so you really feel like a free agent, not like someone with a lot of strings.
Right.
One related question, and actually I think Ira, you mentioned this, is as you go through different parts of the drama and film industry, the economics but also the opportunities are different. So I think you mentioned TV is different than Broadway versus film and so forth.
Yeah.
Any additional comments, a point of view of the audience as far as choices that you make, not just economic, but also just in generally the job content, how it might be different if you pursue TV or film or Broadway?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I was sort of mentioning is that I think it helps to specify, and I think it's very difficult to be a multi-hat, that you can do everything. I think I think if I was, it matters what choices you make, and then other choices you're closing off. So I think in some level, you have to think of television. There are a lot of jobs. It is a factory. There's so many things on television, so you can already see just visually that they need 1,000 directors or 500 directors, as opposed to independent film or even feature film in general, when you're talking about a much smaller number. So I think that you can see opportunities by the landscape of the product, really.
Mm-hmm.
Well, certainly the other is just the pure economics. It's very straightforward. If you have a Broadway theater, there are only so many seats, whereas TV, you may have a higher fixed cost for a particular show, but you can show it to millions of people, and it's just a simple math, when you really look at it.
Right. I would say, did I just take this away from you? That there's an additional issue, again, from the writing standpoint. Yes, you reach many more people doing film and television, maybe especially right now television, than you do in theater. But what you give up, as a playwright, you own the copyright to your work, and you are the ultimate authority in the room and on the production. Whereas when you're working in television and film, especially if you're writing a screenplay and there's a different director, not like our situation where he's writing his own movies, but as a screenwriter, you are a hired hand. You are doing a job that someone has specified very specifically for you. And in television, I think there's more autonomy. It's more of a writer's medium than film at the moment. But again, there are multiple producers, and very often you're in a room working with other people. There's not the same sense of autonomy. So economically, it's much more practical, but there are some sacrifices if you're coming from theater.
And I think in television, it's actually a writer's medium for only one writer.
Right.
Within a context of a writer's room in which there's a number of writers. So I think many writers in television and Hollywood in general would feel that that's it's famously the job with the least amount of control in entertainment.
Well, certainly from an economic point of view, you also have to look at, if you're starting a career, the fact is the business model of TV is getting TV is getting attacked with cable and so forth too. So you have to look ahead and say, the situation today could change, with changes in the structure of the industry. Right?
I've never thought that way. I think that it's very difficult. It's sort of what I was saying about the macro and the micro. I think as someone who is generative artist, it's very hard to think macro, even though you want to be aware of what's happening within the culture that you're, and not be naive to it. I think it's a very hard place to try to alter in the course of your own. It does. You have to be driven by something else on some level.
Mm-hmm.
The next question. All of you have been in drama theater and film now for some time, so you've had a chance both personally, to have a career that's, not in the beginning, but also be exposed to many people, and colleagues as well. What do you think are the characteristics of people who seem to be happy and successful, but what are other
Those are very
characteristics of
different
people?
words.
No, not necessarily. Yeah, and there are people who are successful or not happy, so they're not necessarily 100% correlated with each other. But also, what are observations you have of people who may have started out with good intentions but ended up either unhappy, right? Is there any generalization you can make from your own experiences with people in the profession?
They're probably doing it for the wrong reasons. Like maybe they think they're going to make a lot of money. But no, I think there are, more often than not, I find people who are trying to make their life in my area, in the theater, if they are actually really unhappy, they're trying to do a job that makes them miserable, but they think they need to be doing it for some reason. People have a hard time recognizing that they're unhappy, and part of your role as a friend or a colleague is to try and help them to see that. Sometimes it's as simple as, it's not as simple as not being good at the job. It's really, it may not be using the best talent, or it may not be engaging that person in the right way, and particularly in an economy that's tough. If you get a job and you've been offered a starting place in an art that you think you love, and you're anxious about giving it up, trying to move beyond it. So I think misery is a big reason.
Amy?
Well, there are some practical things that I would highlight. I think that if you're someone who likes to go to the same job every day for the same hours, theater's unless you want to be in theater management, and even then, theater is not the right choice for you. I think that if you, actually, one thing I struggle with, my natural clock is not a late clock. I like to get up at 7 and go to bed at like 10 or 11, which means that I have what I think is called social jet lag a lot of the time. Like I just feel like the world that I live in is operating on the wrong clock. So I sort of make do, but that is something to take into account. I think some of the people who are really miserable, and I'm glad you talked about the difference between being successful and being happy, because I know some, especially actors for some reason, I know some actors who I consider to be the most successful actors working in New York who are deeply bitter and deeply unhappy, and I think that has to do with an expectation of being in the limelight all of the time, and I think they have a tendency to recalibrate very quickly. Like there's a certain thing that they want, and then they get it, and within days it's no longer making them happy. And that's not just actors. I mean, I think that's all of it. I think it's a very human trait, but if that's something you know about yourself, I'd say something you should start working on now. Unfortunately, I think it's really hard to have a family when you're in the theater, and a lot of people do it, including myself. There was recently an article in the New York Times about women directors, and it was great photographs of this great crop of women who are at the forefront of directing right now in the theater. For some reason, all the quotes in the article were by men. It was like, these women are really good at directing. Take it from the men you respect. That has nothing to do with this conversation, but it's just a pet peeve. But one of the directors interviewed, Jackson Gay, said that she thinks of herself as a director with young children, which is a smaller minority than women directors. And I think that's really hard, especially hard for directors, because directors are the people who get there first and leave last. As a playwright, it's a little easier. I can sort of breeze in and breeze out and claim that my brain needs space or whatever whenever I want to leave. But if you're an actor or anyone who has to be really on the clock, it's a really hard thing to navigate financially too. I think we really, Vicki, I'm talking to you, and to you, Roberta, and whoever else is in theater management, we really have to think about how we can make that easier for men and women with children to help them out and provide childcare and different things. So that, I would say, if your family life is like your #1 priority and you want to say have kids very early, like in your 20s, I'd say that's going to be very challenging in the theater. And the last thing I'd say, which relates to all of these, is that I think Montaigne called it having a room at the back of the shop. I think there's the healthiest people I know in the theater don't have all of their eggs in the theater basket, have this sense that their work is desperately important to them and is what fulfills them, but there is something else. There is some kind of sense of personal integrity. There are other things in their lives. And this is a very, I don't really mean this in a really literal practical sense. I think it's a very kind of metaphysical thing that I'm talking about. But I think if there's some ability to step back and have a sense of oneself and one's core, not completely in terms of the latest New York Times review or whatever, that is deeply helpful.
I think you could also say that a lot of playwrights and film writers really are severely unhappy, and I don't value that and say you have to be unhappy to be a good writer, but it does happen, and that's okay too, on some level. What I was going to say is I was trying to think about the one quality that I see in successful people in the arts, and I really, what came to me was that was a sense of authentic passion for what the field that they've chosen to do. I think it's very hard to fake it in theater and film and in television, in commercial cinema, in experimental cinema, in independent cinema. I think it's very hard to be inauthentic and be successful, because I think people can tell. And a lot of what you're doing, particularly as a filmmaker and a film director, is selling yourself, and I think people can read you. So I think if you hate musicals, then you should not go into musicals, because you probably will not succeed in musicals, is the truth. I mean, I've always thought Spielberg is so successful because he's completely in line personally with the work that he makes, which happens to be extremely commercial. But he's not faking it, and I think you can tell within the work, and I think that's important. The other thing that I would say is that the people that I know that are successful, my peers that are successful, are extremely knowledgeable about the small little world that we've chosen to commit our lives to. We are, as filmmakers, we're the cinephiles, we're the people who know lots more films than everyone else, we're the people who, at least in the first 20 years of our careers, were going to the movies 3 or 4 times a week. We actually loved the work. And later, that's very beneficial, because we're the people in the room who actually can not just like show off, but we know the stuff. We've got it in our, we really have the depth there. So I think that's also very important for success.
Well, this is a wonderful conversation, and but I said we want to make sure we had time at the end for questions. We're going to take questions from all 3 venues. I actually have 4 questions that have come via email from the people who are watching by streaming video. So what I'd like to do is maybe just take turns and maybe start first to see if there's a question here from the audience here in New York.
Thanks.
And you'll have to speak up loudly so that people can hear.
I will.
Maybe here we go. Why don't we'll give you the microphone.
All right.
And why don't you mention your name?
Thanks very much. My name is Michael Knowles. I'm an actor and Yale class of 2012. And it occurs to me that all 3 of you work with actors in different ways. So I wanted to hear each of your advice on what you would do, say, if a young actor graduated Yale 8 months ago. Hypothetically speaking, what each of your advice would be as a writer, director, manager.
I didn't hear the question, I'm sorry.
His question was, what advice would you give to someone who recently graduated from Yale and going into acting from your perspective, from each of your individual perspectives?
I would say get together with the the people you liked working with at Yale and begin making your own work here. And don't worry right now about getting an agent. Don't worry about going to cattle call, the EPAs. So that's good for auditioning practice. I think your focus right now should be on figuring out the kind of work you want to make, which means seeing a lot of work and getting together with people you know and making your own work.
That seems like very good advice. I think one thing that I've noticed is a lot of people who got out of Yale and wanted to become actors, most of them didn't become actors, and most of them probably shouldn't have become actors on some level. So I would say, again, this is a kind of, it's not very, maybe very helpful, but I'd say if after 4 or 5 years you're not getting roles, then find another career. Truthfully, like, people do get work as actors, I find. They get work, it doesn't matter where. It doesn't matter if it's, that they get cast, because I think, from my perspective, as a director, talent is pretty immediate, and it doesn't actually have to be trained. It can be a non-actor, but some people are actually natural in being themselves in front of a camera, and a lot of people aren't. And I don't actually rehearse with my actors. I expect them to actually, from the audition, be some version of the person I want to see. So I look for something that's already just a natural ability.
Yeah, I was going to also say, to bring your best self into the room for each of those auditions. So don't bring the person you think the other person wants to see, but bring yourself. And I'm not an actor, so I can't help you figure out how to do that. But my sense is that the authenticity of what you have to offer is either going to be right or not, and you certainly aren't going to be right if you're trying to take on some persona that you think is expected. And then the second thing is get a great day job where you have some flexibility.
The next question I'm going to take from someone who sent it by email, who's participating in my webinar, and it's a geographic question, which is, what are the advantages of LA, Chicago, or New York City for decisions about TV or theater or elsewhere? So the question is, does it make a difference, LA, New York, Chicago, in terms of a career success or otherwise? I don't think the question was about weather.
Right.
I think you should.
So the question is where to go if you want to make to be in film or in TV. I think it really depends. I think New York is a place where it's very hard to find jobs, creative jobs within the film industry that are not in production. And I think there's a lot of interesting jobs in New York City in production, and production can be a very interesting place. But you have to like to work on films. In LA, I think there's many more jobs that are more office jobs, that are more writing jobs, that are more about something that's more creative outside of the production element. There's also more careers in Hollywood, meaning career paths that you can investigate. So I think as a film person, New York is still a place where we're connected to the theater here. We're connected to the idea that this is a city you move to become an artist. And I think that's a good reason to move to New York, to be honest.
My experience of LA is that unless you live there, they don't really talk to you. So if you are interested in working in LA, move to LA. Don't wait to get the job there. Move there and then get the job.
Now, Victoria, we cannot see the audience at Yale, and you can. Could you ask if there's someone who has a question, and if so?
Yes, I'm gonna have this gentleman here come. Why don't you come? Oh, you have a microphone. Good. Oh.
Go ahead.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. So I'm curious about. So we're talking about sustaining yourself in addition to making your own independent work, because I think that's the theme, to have the work that's important to you to make that. How did you guys sustain yourself at the beginning? What kind of
what kind of jobs did you look into? How did you go about doing that? Because you mentioned find a great day job, and I'm curious what a good day job for someone interested in the arts is.
You guys are breaking up in New York again. Your microphone it sounds like it's got someone running sandpaper over it. So let me start and see if you clear up. So I networked, and my first job that I could get, wanting to be in charge of things, of course, right? So I always wanted to be in a manager position. I cheated on a secretarial test and told them that I had passed, that I was a very good typist. I couldn't type at all. And I got hired I won't tell you where because they might come after me. And then I paid a secretary to do the work for me. And I worked in that job for 6 months while I networked and got to know the artists who were working in that organization. And one of them, artists and administrators, and one of them hired me to go to work at what is now ART at Harvard. In marketing. So deception is what got my first job.
Another great action.
I did. I paid the secretary to. I didn't have to type that much for my job. It was like a mailroom job. But when I did have to type, I had cheated and told them that I was like this ace typist. So I found a woman who was a great typist, and I paid her to do the typing.
Do we have any other? Okay. We have another question from. You'll have to come up. Sorry for handing this giant microphone.
I'm Deborah, Calvin class of 03, and this is from, I think, senior Ira, really. Was it a challenge to get a literary agent, or do you have a literary agent, and representation, or how was that process for you?
My first thought was I lived with a literary agent for 10 years. Let me just quickly answer that other question from the perspective of how to start. I think the important thing is to try to get connected to people you think are interesting. So I started by working as an assistant to a film director. My first job out of Yale was an assistant within the art department on a film, and I quit really fast because I went to Yale and they were asking me to do things that I thought were beneath me, which was super, super snotty. But I got hired by the same film to then get another job as an assistant to the director. And it was very important, if you want to go into film, work on a film early in your career. Get to know the bureaucracy and how films are structured, because it's the same on any film. So go, just really like, if you move to New York and you see a bunch of films that you like, call the people who are running the office there and try to get a job in the office. Try to get a job close to people who are doing creative work that you think is interesting. Because if you go there and then you actually stay late and you are responsible and you're smart, you'll get hired like that, another job. People do move very quickly in the film industry in New York to a certain point. And then the question about an agency, you can't, my agent just was at a class that a friend of mine teaches at Columbia, and he told the class one thing and they all said it was the most helpful thing. You can't go looking for an agent, they have to go look for you. And I think it's generally true.
I'll answer both of those questions. Also, so I actually have a different sort of day job theory than Ira. I think the best day jobs are the ones you can walk away from at the end of the day and leave behind completely and mentally. So a few of the day jobs I held, I worked in the legal department of Bear Stearns back in the year 2000. I had really flexible hours and was paid $20 an hour, and that was 2000, and those jobs don't really exist anymore, but that was a great day job for an artist. I taught after school creative writing in the North Bronx. I worked as a temp at a real estate development company, and I worked as a college counselor and as a babysitter on the Upper East Side and some others too. In terms of the agent, I would really agree. I think that, I know it's, I mean, I remember how much I wanted an agent before I had one. I know how easy it is to put a lot of emphasis on that, but I would say by the time you really need an agent, you will have one. They are wonderful and great to have, and they do send your plays out to, you know, places that might not otherwise read them, but usually the momentum sort of happens in the opposite direction. And at the point, again, it's just what they're really useful for is the stuff that always happens necessarily after you've been noticed and you have fun. So I would say really focus on the work.
Well, it's now a little bit past the official ending time, and although I've got 6 questions here by email and so forth, I'm sure there are others. I want to be respectful of ending roughly on time. So first of all, I really want to thank the 3 panelists who have done a really superb job and really not only explain what was exciting and why you're in it, but also quite candid about the pros and cons, and I want to thank you for that. And I think everyone should really join me in thanking and I also am very happy to see that there were some, some faces up in New Haven, and there are a lot of people down here in New York, and a lot of people on streaming video. And I want to thank you all for joining. And those of you who, as a result of saying, now I want to be an entrepreneur, on April 17th, we have a career panel on entrepreneurism. Actually, they actually connected, because a lot of being in drama and film is being an entrepreneur as well.
Can I just say that he has organized this on his own will? He just decided to do it. So talk about entrepreneurship and the ability to create things. I mean, thank you for bringing
I do think this is one of those things where, our view about this, and we're working very hard with people from the Yale Undergraduate Career Services and AYA, and our view is if 2, 3, 4 people at each session end up making a better decision in their life, either because they decide, I didn't know that was a facet of life, so I won't do it, or I now know something that's very exciting that enhances my commitment to that career, I think we will have done our job. But the fact we have so many people on these is a very good sign. But I also want to thank all those people who helped at AYA and also the Yale Undergraduate Career Services for their help as well. So thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you at other panels. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you.
Bye, Vicky.